Hello, my name is Ana Quintela, and I've been working at RAIZ as researcher for 6 years. We want to introduce you our new platform that is called eGlobulus, that is a driver for knowledge transfer in eucalyptus and forest management. Let's look to the conceptual framework of eGlobulus, its main goals, the key criteria for eGlobulus building, the decision framework and output list, and let's explore eGlobulus Live and further developments. What were the motivation for eGlobulus project? We know that despite the forest potential of Portuguese territory and the deficit in the national supply of eucalypt wood, a large part of eucalypt stands are far from their maximum productive capability due to the lack of forest management. We know also that we have a large number of forestry owners and that lands are mainly private and with small scale. The majority of the owners have land with less than 5 hectares. Therefore, initiatives trying to boost the forestry management are welcome, and if successfully, it will bring a positive impact on environmental, economical, and social national accounts. The technical and scientific support the forest operations that maximize the potential of the sites and ensures the sustainability of the ecosystem. And in this context, eGlobulus project arises, intending to develop a forestry planning platform for sustainable forest management. It was submitted to SEAC-COL and it was approved, and it had 3 main goals: to encourage informed forest management, to provide tailored forestry management plan that meet the wood production with the preservation of the other services of the ecosystem, and to provide higher economic incomes to the producer by increasing the wood production and the economic profitability by implementing sustainable practices. In order to reach these goals, key criteria were established for eGlobulus. Namely, the platform should be easy to use, readily available, and must run in multi-devices. The outputs should be easily understandable by the users and instructive. The user registration when needed and data entry should be easy, self-explanatory, and the number of input information should be as limited as possible. And platform should be also evolutive. This means that it can be updated whenever we want with new services and new content. Also important was to engage the stakeholders and the key players in our forest context to work with us since the beginning of the project in the delineation of the platform and the contents. So actually we are a really big team, and thank you all. Only a brief overview on eGlobulus organization. It has a own page with easy access to all the content in the platform, and it is divided mainly into 2 main modules. One that has the project information and also technical and scientific information on silviculture and related issues that doesn't require registration, it is open access. And the other module that is the one that allows the tailored technical indication. This is an important model given the diversity of existing soil and climate conditions in Portugal. So the forestry practices should be compatible with each site condition, optimizing resource management and the cost effectiveness of the implemented practices. This is a module that requires a login because it requests personal information However, it is possible to try a trial version, providing a try to believe experience previously to the registration. At the end of this module, the user can have access to a site full characterization, or if he requested, a site full characterization plus detailed indication for practices on eucalypt stand establishment, eucalypt stand maintenance, or even for coppice management. And in order to deliver the indication requested, a complex framework was built for each silviculture practice. So, only for you to have an idea, here are some of those decision frameworks. But now, join me in a live platform tour. This is the homepage that has easy access to all the contents. Besides the project informations, you can find some news or some events that you may be interested in online library, some technical thematic folders, some audiovisual materials, and some papers, communications, and reports can be appreciated. And in this corner, you have the access to the private module, to the tailored technical indications. So let's imagine that I'm already a producer registered in the platform. I have to draw or entering my land by drawing it using a mapping service such as the Google Maps, or by uploading it as shapefile or a KML file. I'm going to draw one as an example. Let's go to Raiz, for example. Okay. This is a very important step because it allows the integration of geographical information system with all the other databases that we have running in the back end of the platform, that allows specific technical indication for specific site conditions. We have to label it. So let's say Raiz. And after this, the user is invited to characterize his land. And the input data requested is limited to the needed for technical indication generation, and is presented as sequential questions that are guided by self-explanatory infographics and help buttons. In this case, is asking me if the current occupation is eucalypt, eucalypt mist, or others. I'm going to say that is eucalypt. After is asking what type of eucalypt stand do I have? Okay, it's the first rotation that was planted in March 2018, for example. I don't have to fulfill all the fields. Right now is asking me about the slope. Let's consider the moderate one. Without or with terraces, and so on. I don't have to fulfill every field, so let's consider this one. In this case, I have the characteristics and the information that I provided, and I can also change what I have introduced. I can change the polygon. I can see some possible restrictions that I could have legally, or environmental restriction to my land. And I can finish at this stage, or if I want, I may proceed to request a technical indication. In this case, the first question is about the current occupation of my land, because if it is other occupation, I'm not going to be able to reach a technical indication, only for eucalypt or eucalypt mist. It appears already selected because it was the information that I provided previously in the characterization, so I only have to confirm it. After this, I have to say what I want to do. If I want to establish a eucalypt stand, if I want to make the maintenance of the stand, or if I want to make a coppice management. And for each one of these stages, several practices are available. For instance, for establishment, I have soil tillage, type of plant, the fertilization, stocking, and the time of plantation available. But let's ask, for example, for maintenance, and thereafter you can try and explore all of the other possibilities. I'm going to ask for a maintenance fertilization. The questions that are asked me are specific for the technical indication that I requested. In this case, it's asking me if I have already provided some phosphorus fertilization in my land. I'm going to say yes, for example. I confirm the planting date. If I have already made some fertilization previously of maintenance, I'm going to say no. And if so, this was the only information that was needed from the user to provide a customized technical indication. The user will be access to a file where he can have his characterization with information that he provided, and also the technical indication. And this, in this case, is providing the amount of fertilizer and the type of fertilizer that he should apply. Also, some additional procedure notes. And when possible, the indication has more than one option to give more flexibility to the user to choose the one that suits him best. And that's it. So he can print it or send it to anyone. He can even share this management with a producer organization or a certification group or other entity that can help him to execute this management plan. And he can sign out of the platform and return as many times as he wants, because this is his private space, and he can do whatever he wants with the information. After this, he only have to get out and return to the home page. This platform was released in 2019, August 2019, and by the end of 2020, it reached the 24,000 visualization and around 4,000 users. And it's going to continue evolving with new services and new content. And for example, we have recently a collaboration with the GoYap project that will provide improvements for the small-scale forestry in what concerns, for example, the soil tillage. And now, to encourage you to visit us once again, I'm going to let you with our promotional video. Please enjoy it. And thank you very much for your attention. Visit us.
Meu nome é Luísa Gonçalves e vou proceder à apresentação do estudo que se intitula Os impactos dos valores, crenças, expectativas e comunicação entre cientistas e profissionais florestais europeus na tomada de decisões sobre medidas de adaptação florestal às alterações climáticas. Este estudo foi desenvolvido por investigadores de 10 países europeus, membros da Ação COST FP 1304 e dos quais faziam parte 2 membros nacionais, eu própria, professora do Politécnico de Leiria, investigadora do INES Coimbra, e o professor Fernando Reboredo, da Universidade Nova. Irei começar a apresentação com um breve enquadramento do estudo efetuado, os seus objetivos, a metodologia adotada no desenvolvimento de um questionário implementado a nível europeu, os resultados mais relevantes e exemplos de necessidades de comunicação identificadas e, por fim, as conclusões. Portanto, nesta apresentação são assim divulgados parte da análise dos resultados de um questionário que foi implementado na Europa e para o qual contribuíram também profissionais florestais portugueses e foi desenvolvido no âmbito da rede de ações COST, com a designação Towards Robust Projections of European Forest Under Climate Change, com o acrónimo PROFOUND. O desenvolvimento do questionário teve como enquadramento ou motivação o facto de as tomadas de decisão relativamente à adaptação às mudanças climáticas diferirem a nível mundial de uma região para a outra e o mesmo acontecer com a convicção ou crença do impacto das alterações climáticas na floresta e estas serem muitas vezes determinantes nas tomadas de decisão. Assim, o desenvolvimento do questionário e sua implementação no espaço europeu teve como objetivo avaliar as crenças ou valores dos profissionais florestais e cientistas sobre os efeitos das alterações climáticas na floresta e quais as adaptações consideradas eficazes a implementar na Europa, e ainda identificar as necessidades de comunicação dos profissionais florestais europeus. O inquérito efetuado permitiu ainda testar um conjunto de hipóteses, nomeadamente se a tomada de decisão de medidas para a adaptação às alterações climáticas se correlaciona com 4 aspectos, nomeadamente a polarização dos valores sobre os impactos das alterações climáticas, com a crença nos impactos locais das alterações climáticas, com os valores líquidos dos impactos esperados e com a percepção da capacidade de adaptação. Mais informação sobre a análise dos resultados do inquérito efetuado, diretrizes de comunicação desenvolvidas, encontram-se em 2 artigos publicados nos jornais científicos Sustainability e Environmental Research Letters. No link que aqui se apresenta e que também consta no artigo submetido à conferência, pode-se aceder aos dados e a toda a análise efetuada. Em termos da metodologia de implementação, consistiu em várias fases. Na primeira fase, foi efetuada uma identificação da estrutura organizacional da floresta de cada país participante, pelo respectivo representante. Pretendia-se garantir que a seleção dos profissionais florestais a convidar em cada país cobrisse uma ampla gama de organizações florestais com competências equivalentes em cada país. Em Portugal foram convidados a participar organismos públicos como o ICNF, a APA, dezenas de associações, NGOs e também empresas privadas da pasta de papel. Em seguida, foi desenvolvida a estrutura do questionário, tendo por base os objetivos a atingir anteriormente referidos, assim como as hipóteses a testar. O inquérito foi desenvolvido em língua inglesa e depois traduzido para a língua nativa de cada país. A partir da análise dos dados, foram desenvolvidas as diretrizes de comunicação que estão publicadas na revista Environmental Research. Os 10 países envolvidos cobrem o espaço norte-sul e oeste-leste da Europa, conforme se pode ver aqui na figura, representando uma ampla gama de condições bioclimáticas e uma mistura de estruturas económicas, sociopolíticas, e foram convidados a participar cerca de 10.000 profissionais florestais por representantes dos 10 países, tendo o convite sido enviado por e-mail. O questionário esteve aberto entre 22 de abril a 16 de agosto de 2016, incluiu 32 questões no total, relacionadas com alterações climáticas e florestais, projeções florestais, modelos, aspectos sociodemográficos. Foram obtidas um total de 746 respostas de profissionais florestais e 67 respostas de cientistas da COST. O trabalho aqui apresentado incidiu sobre as respostas apenas de profissionais florestais a 11 questões, totalizando 508 respostas completas. Na questão Q1, inquiriu-se sobre que alterações espera nas florestas do seu país, como resultado das alterações climáticas induzidas pelo homem. Na questão Q2, inquiriu se já sentiu no cotidiano os efeitos da mudança climática induzida pelo homem no seu país. Na questão Q3 a Q6 foi perguntado se as alterações climáticas graduais ou provocadas por eventos extremos terão, respectivamente, um efeito negativo ou positivo na floresta ao nível de um conjunto de 11 aspectos que vão desde a produção sustentável da madeira, produção sustentável da pasta, produção sustentável da biomassa para a produção de energia, produção de produtos não lenhosos, a caça, a biodiversidade, atividades recreativas, armazenamento de carbono, ganhos económicos, serviços de ecossistema regulatório, desenvolvimento do nível de vida e subsistência rural. Na questão Q7 a Q8 questionou sobre se um conjunto de 15 medidas de adaptação da floresta apresentadas eram consideradas eficazes no país, na produção sustentável da madeira e na conservação da biodiversidade, respectivamente. Na questão Q9 questionou se o inquirido tinha autoridade para implementar as suas ideias em relação à adaptação da floresta, às adaptações climáticas. E na questão Q10 a Q11, em que medida o inquirido promove ativamente medidas de adaptação para garantir a produção sustentada de madeira e a conservação da biodiversidade, respectivamente. Para a análise dos dados foi utilizado o modelo Bayesian Additive Regression Tree. A partir das questões efetuadas foram construídas um conjunto de variáveis. A variável adaptação, por exemplo, foi construída separando as respostas em que pelo menos uma vez os inquiridos responderam sim sempre à pergunta Q10 sobre terem promovido qualquer uma das 15 medidas de adaptação propostas, ao qual foi atribuído o valor 1. Daqueles que não o fizeram, tem sido atribuído o valor 0. As variáveis autoridade e medidas foram construídas de forma semelhante a partir das questões Q9 e Q7, respectivamente. Foram ainda utilizadas as expressões desenvolvidas por Pearson para medir a expectativa que os inquiridos têm de que eventos extremos ou mudanças graduais têm impactos positivos ou negativos nos 11 objetivos que constam das questões Q3 a Q6. Os resultados mostram que a expectativa dos profissionais florestais sobre as alterações nas florestas dos seus países como resultado das mudanças climáticas serão alterações negativas. Como se pode ver no gráfico superior esquerdo, 58% dos inquiridos respondeu provavelmente sim e 27% respondeu definitivamente sim. Portanto, mais de 80% estão convictos de que as alterações serão negativas. Contudo, quando questionados sobre as alterações positivas, embora 40% considere que não ocorrerão alterações positivas, 27% considera que provavelmente sim e 8% considera que definitivamente sim. Ou seja, cerca de 35% considera que essas alterações poderão ser positivas. Constata-se que existe assim uma polarização de percepção entre os profissionais florestais. Comparando os valores da convicção dos efeitos negativos entre os profissionais que promoveram medidas de adaptação dos que não promoveram, verifica-se que os valores de convicção são semelhantes e o mesmo acontece relativamente aos efeitos positivos. Contudo, os resultados da análise por país mostram que, de uma forma generalizada, todos responderam maioritariamente, provavelmente sim e definitivamente sim, que os impactos das alterações serão negativos. Mas, como ilustra o gráfico da direita, os profissionais da Finlândia, Suécia e Reino Unido têm expectativas que os impactos serão maioritariamente positivos. A percentagem, por exemplo, de profissionais polacos que considera que os efeitos serão positivos é semelhante aos que consideram que provavelmente não. Os profissionais dos restantes países do sul da Europa consideram maioritariamente que não ocorrerão efeitos positivos. Portanto, este resultado mostra que há profissionais que consideram que as alterações climáticas poderão ter efeitos negativos relativamente a determinados aspectos florestais, mas serem positivos relativamente a outros, e esta polarização manifesta-se mais nos profissionais florestais dos países do norte da Europa do que no sul. Analisando a correlação, constata-se efetivamente que esta é negativa entre as crenças dos profissionais florestais nos impactos positivos e negativos das alterações climáticas nas florestas dos seus países, como mostra a figura. Para testar a hipótese 2, foram analisadas duas situações: a convicção dos impactos locais nas alterações climáticas na floresta correlacionar-se com a tomada de decisão para a sua adaptação, e a convicção de o ter vivenciado os impactos das alterações climáticas correlacionar-se com a tomada de decisões para a sua adaptação. Ambas as correlações destas duas situações com a tomada de decisão apresentaram valores muito baixos, como se pode ver aqui neste slide, No gráfico da esquerda, pode constatar-se que a percentagem de profissionais que responderam definitivamente sim à crença dos efeitos das alterações climáticas é muito superior à percentagem dos que acreditam que definitivamente já vivenciaram os impactos das alterações climáticas. Constatou-se também que, apesar de 83% dos inquiridos definitivamente ou provavelmente esperarem impactos das alterações climáticas na floresta, apenas 38% implementaram medidas de adaptação. Portugal foi o país em que os inquiridos promoveram menos medidas de adaptação às alterações climáticas e que a maior percentagem de profissionais que promoveram medidas de adaptação ocorreu na Alemanha, Itália, Polónia, Reino Unido e Eslováquia. Em termos da implementação de medidas face à projeção dos impactos esperados, o modelo BART previu num cenário mais negativo que 1 em cada 2 profissionais florestais defendem a tomada de medidas que ajudem a sustentar a produção de madeira num clima em mudança, enquanto que num cenário mais positivo previu apenas cerca de 1 em cada 4 profissionais florestais a defenderem idênticas medidas. Para testar a hipótese 4, foram analisadas duas situações: o número de medidas de adaptação percepcionadas como eficazes correlacionarem-se com a adaptação às alterações climáticas efetuadas e a autoridade para implementar as próprias ideias correlacionar-se com a adaptação efetuada. Verificou-se que a variável adaptação se correlacionou de forma significativa com a variável medidas e autoridade, no modelo BART multivariado. Contudo, entre os profissionais florestais com forte convicção que os efeitos serão maioritariamente negativos, 39% dos inquiridos considera que as medidas implementadas não são efetivas, sendo mais evidente entre os profissionais florestais da Roménia, Eslováquia e Alemanha. São apenas aqui apresentados como exemplo algumas necessidades de comunicação identificadas. A informação completa sobre as diretrizes desenvolvidas encontra-se nos artigos publicados. Por exemplo, os profissionais com menor crença nos impactos locais das mudanças climáticas na floresta foram encontrados principalmente na Bulgária e na Polónia. Portanto, estes necessitam de comunicação sobre mudanças climáticas per si e os seus impactos na floresta. Os que apresentaram mais baixa crença em terem vivenciado os impactos da alteração climática na floresta foram os profissionais da Polónia, Finlândia, Reino Unido, Alemanha e Suécia. Portanto, estes necessitam de comunicações que fortaleçam essa convicção. Os profissionais florestais da Eslováquia, Roménia, Itália e Portugal têm uma maior convicção dos impactos esperados nas áreas de retorno económico, produção de celulose, produção de madeira e produção de energia, contrariamente aos da Finlândia e Suécia, que têm uma maior convicção dos impactos esperados no desenvolvimento da subsistência rural, serviços de regulação dos ecossistemas, biodiversidade, recreação, armazenamento de carbono, produção na madeira e caça. Portanto, estes profissionais precisam de comunicação sobre como as mudanças climáticas afetam os diferentes objetos de valor. Em conclusão, foi observada uma polarização dos valores negativos e positivos dos impactos das alterações climáticas em cerca de metade dos profissionais florestais que responderam ao inquérito. Nos países do norte da Europa, os efeitos esperados são menos negativos que no sul da Europa, onde estes são maioritariamente negativos. As expectativas sobre os impactos na produção de madeira, retornos económicos e serviços ambientais reguladores dos ecossistemas são, na sua maioria, negativas, enquanto as expectativas sobre a biodiversidade e a produção de energia são principalmente positivas. Os resultados mostram que a forte crença nos impactos locais das alterações climáticas na floresta é um pré-requisito para a tomada de decisão de adaptação, mas contudo não é suficiente. A comunicação sobre as mudanças climáticas tem um potencial muito significativo neste aspecto e também no processo de adaptação, mas para ser eficaz deve atender às necessidades dos principais florestais. Portanto, os que possuem fracas expectativas dos impactos necessitam de comunicação sobre as alterações climáticas e qual o seu impacto na floresta antes de ocorrer comunicação sobre as medidas a adotar. Muito obrigada pela vossa atenção. Caso pretendam mais informação sobre os resultados do inquérito, podem contactar-me, a mim ou ao professor Fernando Robredo, através dos e-mails aqui apresentados. Mais uma vez, muito obrigada.
Hello, my name is Catarina Gonçalves and I'm here to talk to you about biological control in eucalyptus plantations, the present status, and some of the challenges that we face. So eucalypts are not native to Portugal, as they are not in many places where eucalypts are used commercially. And for several decades, they didn't really have any pests or diseases that attacked them. But this has changed in recent years, and we've witnessed an increase in the number of new invasive pests. When they arrive here, the pests, they thrive because they don't have anything to control them. They don't have any natural enemies, and they can cause severe losses in wood production. So biological control is widely acknowledged as being cost-effective, having long-term effects, and being environmentally safe. Just like pests, some natural enemies arrived naturally in Portugal without human intervention, and they keep the pests partly or completely controlled. And in this table, there are a few examples of such natural enemies that arrived in Portugal naturally. But when pests are not completely controlled, there's one thing we can do. We can start a specific program, a specific biological control program. Whenever the control program involves non-native species, it's called classical biological control. And it requires supervision by both national authorities, and in this case, it's Instituto da Conservação da Natureza e das Florestas, and also guidelines that are defined at the European level. So a classical biological control program usually involves 5 general steps. First, you need to identify biological control agents in the pest's native habitat. Then you have to import them and study them under quarantine conditions. Those studies involve efficiency and risk assessment, which means we have to prove that the natural control agent is both efficient and safe. If we find that this is the case, we have to produce them and release them in the wild. And after we do, we need to assess what happens after they are released, both in terms of its establishment, efficiency, and non-target impacts. So in this scheme, you can see I will not explain all the little steps here. Generally, it's those 5 steps that I talked about before, but just to give you an idea of the several steps that are involved and several different authorities that need to approve every step. So I would like to talk to you about some specific examples. And there are several pest species in Portugal that have been subject or are being subject to biological control programs, and they are in different phases. So I will start with the snout beetle. This is the most important eucalypt pest in Portugal and in other places of the world. Both the adults and the larvae will completely eat leaves and twigs, and heavy infestation can lead to complete wood losses, so zero production. And a long time ago, more than 20 years ago, a natural enemy, which is called Anaphis nitans, was released in Spain. It was introduced in Spain, but it arrived in Portugal by its own means. And so what happened was, because the insect was establishing here in Portugal, we decided to give it a little help. And between 1997 and 2003, around 300,000 insects were reared and released in Portugal to aid in the natural establishment. And by 1998, field parasitism would be found to be as high as 80% of the eggs. And by 2003, the parasitoid was widely established and the program was terminated. But we didn't stop there. Post-release assessment of this particular parasitoid was quite comprehensive. And In 2018, Carlos Valente, my co-author, published a study where he showed that with biological control, there were still almost 650 million euros in losses. But when we consider the alternatives, which are replacement with other eucalypt species that were not so affected by the pest, or insecticide applications, or wood imports to offset the losses, any of those alternatives would result in losses that would be 4 to 11 times higher. So at a total cost of 1.1 million euros, this program had a return of 67 euros for every €1 invested. So this is really a very successful case. But while Anapsnitens is extremely efficient in many places, at higher altitudes, it's not completely effective. So we started looking for alternatives, other biological control agents that could help Anapsnitens. And the first surveys in Australia, specifically in Tasmania, started in 2008. And many other natural enemies were found. And here are a few examples. They are all parasitoids. Some have attacked the eggs of the snout beetle, and some attacked the larvae. And another Anaph species, Anaphsines spectatus, was found to readily parasitize the eggs of the beetle. And so we selected it for further studies. Several years of studies under quarantine resulted in 3 publications that I'm showing you here. And we basically focused, we wanted to answer 3 basic questions, which were, will it be effective? Will it have risks for native fauna? And can it compete with Anapsnitens? And the results were quite positive. And so to date, 400,000 insects have been released in 19 locations. And in 8 of those 19 locations, this new parasitoid established. However, parasitism rates remain low, usually under 3%. And we will continue to accompany this situation, but it's not looking very bright, to be quite honest. And so we looked at parasitoids of the larvae, and these can be quite interesting because right now, nothing attacks the larvae of the snout beetle. And so it's very promising. And we identified a fly. It's a parasitoid of the larvae. It's about 1 centimeter in length, and it really just looks like a fly. Not much is known about this species, and it belongs to a group where sometimes the parasitoids are not very host specific. So there's the risk that they will attack other species. So far, that's not what we're seeing. Both the behavior and the biology of this species reveal that it may be quite host specific. And while there's much work still ahead of us before we can even consider releasing the insect in the field, we are quite optimistic. And to show you another example, I'm talking to you now about another pest, the bronze bug. This species is not in Portugal for a long time. Well, it arrived in 2012. And it also feeds on the leaves of eucalypts. It causes discoloration and defoliation. And this pest species already had an identified natural enemy, and it's called Cleidocoides noack. It's really small, and it lays its eggs in the eggs of the bronze bug. So, other countries, other research groups already studied this insect and already released it with quite a lot of success, both in South Africa and several South American countries. So because a lot was already known about this species, we mostly focused on non-target impacts for the local fauna, and we found them to be negligible. Right now, we have prepared a request to release this parasitoid in the field, and we're awaiting feedback from the national authorities. And so hopefully we will be able to release these new natural enemies soon. And finally, one last example of another pest that is currently being considered for biological control. It's the tortoise beetle. It's a very recent arrival in Portugal. It's expanding from the southeast. It feeds on many different eucalypt pests, and it poses a serious threat. The thing is, we don't know if it has any effective natural enemies. None are known so far. Some tests in California were used with an egg parasitoid, but maybe because this egg parasitoid is specific of another Trachymella species, that's the name of the insect, maybe because it's not that specific, it didn't work, or maybe because it didn't adjust to the climate conditions, it failed to establish in California. So what we're thinking right now is this beetle was described from insects in Australia, in New South Wales. So we're focused on doing surveys in this region and looking for possible candidates for a biological control program. And this is being arranged through the BICEP program, which is a program designed for biological control of eucalypt pests. And so this is what I wanted to share with you. Here are some of the names of the people and the institutions that have helped us so much along the way. It's a lot of names, but it really is an acknowledgement that we would like to make. And thank you for your attention.
Viva, hello. Luisa, I trust we can proceed the discussion in English, correct? Yes. Okay, I asked because you made your presentation in Portuguese and I was wondering. Very good. Well, thank you very much, the three speakers of this session. It was very interesting. I have to acknowledge that two of them are more familiar than the work by Luisa Gonçalves, because we all also work in the same institute, but nevertheless, a very interesting session indeed. I was hoping to get some questions from the audience, so I encourage everybody to submit issues or doubts or queries that you might please. I might start by a few from my own, and I start probably with Luisa, which I found thoroughly interesting. Luisa, first of all, it's quite amazing that you've assembled such a wide range of collaborators in this study. It is very interesting to see that across the board. My question is, these differences in perceptions and in opinions from foresters across Europe, I assume that we would expect those differences given the difference in ecological conditions. In other words, we would expect some parts of Europe to be intrinsically worse affected by climate change than others. But my question is, do you think the differences are explained by the ecological differences, or it's also explained by cultural differences between the different countries?
I think it's both. Cultural, because we are different in Europe, is a fact. we are being, I think that in these 30 years, a lot of changes to bring together Europeans in a way of thinking. And I think these cost actions that are being done are useful to approximate the researchers and to allow this sharing. But and in the field, in the forest professionals, I think that there are cultural differences that have impact in the measures that they adopt. And also in terms of ecological aspects, because what we saw that when we asked about the positive impacts in the positive impacts of the climate changes in forest, the forest professionals in the north consider that they are expecting positive impacts. And in the south, no, in the majority of the forest professionals, they consider that the impacts are going to be negatives.
Yeah. Okay, there's a question for Catarina. Is it's along the lines of climate change, by the way. Is the likelihood of the problems associated with these pests likely to improve or to deteriorate with expected global warming in Portugal?
Thank you for the question. I wish I could answer that. I can't, because we're talking about very complex systems. So whenever you change temperature or humidity, you may impact the ecosystems in ways that you weren't predicting. However, if one considers that a healthy plant, eucalyptus is a plant, of course. This applies to pretty much any culture or any tree. So a healthy tree is more resistant to pests and diseases. And so I would not expect a positive outcome from climate change if the tendency is for increased temperature and increased periods where the trees are stressed.
Okay. One for you, Anna, on the eGlobalus platform. Given the experience you have already with so many users, what's the typical profile of the person asking for prescriptions in eGlobalus? Can you tell us?
Well, actually, we have two different profiles. The one that use a lot the online library, for instance, and the other that are using the customized module for technical indication. In that case, we don't have really the profile of the user because of data privacy. Actually, that's why we need the login, and the only indication and the information that is provided by the user is not available to us. So if we are talking, for example, to know what is the typical user of our technical information, that we don't know because we don't have access to that information. The information that we have available to know what are the main interests in our platform, and it's the Google Analytics indicators that is telling us the number of visualizations, the type of module that are mostly seen, and all of those informations. Actually, when we are referring, for example, to the total area that we have already customized and provided indication, we don't have that information. We don't have access to that information.
Okay. Katerina, another for you. Is there any evidence of native predators becoming used to these pests by just coevolution? Is there any evidence that we might get the situation assisted by some native predators for the pests?
In some situations, it can happen. It's an anecdotal case, but in California, one of the pests of eucalypts is a psyllid. It's like, it's a small little bug that sucks the fluids out of the eucalypt. And a funny thing is that local birds started eating it. But it's not common, this sort of drift of adaptation of the predators. We do see sometimes ladybugs and other insect predators or even birds eating some of the pests. But also an excellent example, the wood borers, which they bore into the wood of the eucalypt, and woodpeckers eat them. So there are some cases. The thing is, because it's not a mandatory specific interaction, so the predator isn't completely dependent on the pest. It can eat something else. So the amount of control is usually small, maybe 5%, 10%. It's difficult that it will ever be enough to keep the pests below an economic threshold.
Okay. Well, there's one here for Luisa. What will be I mentioned the study as finished, or is there a follow-up from this surveys that this group is conducting?
No, it's finished because it was done during this cost action, and the cost action finished. So we continue to work some of the researchers because we continue to work because we have established good relations between us and we have projects. But in this context, now in this context, the finished in 2008.
Well, certainly from the point of view of the forest industry, I certainly encourage you to proceed with this line of work, because it's very important for everyone to understand the perceptions and the reasons behind the perceptions relating to all aspects of forestry. So it's a very valuable line of research, and I encourage you to proceed.
Yes, and it was possible to do a survey like that in these countries because of the cost action, because we have there the researchers of several countries, so it was possible to implement the questionnaire in all these countries. In another way, it will be difficult or more difficult.
Okay, so I run out of questions, but I open the floor also to each of you to have any questions to any other. So if Anna or Katerina or Luisa want to ask something to the colleagues that join in the session, you are free to do it. We still have some time.
I have a question to Katerina. If these type of risks that we see, you think that they are increasing, are changing? So these kind of how you call these disease that are appearing, you are thinking that are increasing, are changing? What you expecting?
Thank you for the question. Yes, they are definitely increasing, and not just forest pests and diseases. It's global. It's also in agriculture, because we live in a globalized world, and so with time, the more people travel and with all the commerce. Yes, new pests and new diseases are expected to arrive. And thinking about climate change, I said earlier that we don't really know the impacts that climate change will have on pests and diseases, because the interactions between the environment and the plant and the pest and the disease and all the elements in the ecosystem, they're very complex. So I can't say that if temperature increases, the pest will increase. We don't know, because maybe an increase in the pest will be offset by the natural enemy. But one thing we can expect is that so far we have an amount of knowledge of how to control a pest or how to control the disease. And if the environment changes, we will have to adapt our response. The control methods that work today may not work in 10 years or 20 years. So it really is a challenge, and we have to keep up, try to keep up, and never let our guard down.
Okay.
Very good. Okay, well, if there's no one else wanting to pose any question, I guess I have to finish, and thank you, the three of you, very much for the talks, and I think we can close the session, and this will be the last section of the day. So I hope we'll join tomorrow for the tomorrow session. Thank you very much, Luisa and Katerina and Anna.
Thank you. Thank you.